much, and a very good morning to all of you. It's a great pleasure to be here again. Last year in Hyderabad, as you said, I had the pleasure of attending and addressing the most interesting first conclave of the Dakshin dialogues convened by South First. And I was pleased to see how a new organization has come up that is dedicated to raising awareness about the issues confronting the southern states. And I'm happy to see them holding a series of discussions on various aspects of our increasingly dysfunctional federalism. I'm now delighted to be back for the second edition, and wherever Vasu is, I can't. There he is. I hope that the third one will be in Thiruvananthapuram. But anyway, it's great to see this continuing, and it's amply clear, I think, to all attendees last year as well as this, that as the South outperforms the North, problems have arisen that must be faced in the interests of India as a whole. Now, the ruling BJP's hyper-nationalist desire for uniformity too often rides roughshod over the federalism that keeps our diverse country united. The Prime Minister speaks of cooperative federalism, but it seems only one side is expected to cooperate while the union government operates at its own sweet will. The government's decision in 2017 to change the terms of reference of the 15th Finance Commission to base allocations on the 2011 census rather than the 1971 census had already prized open a North-South divide, opening a Pandora's box with incalculable consequences for our country. The Finance Commission's revised allocations have sent even more tax money from the South to the North than previously. As I guess he should be here already, Mr. Neelakantan, are you here? Hi, nice to meet you. I've read his excellent book, North versus South, and as he says that in that book, and I'm quoting his words, India rewards the brute demographic advantage of North India over a state's performance. Now, Neelakantan pointed out that the 15th Finance Commission was really in some ways a rebuke of success because the future of our union could itself be threatened by the decisions of the Finance Commission. The bind that Tamil Nadu and Kerala in particular find themselves in is they're at a stage where their success is being used against them by the union government, and that's the government is seeking rather aggressively to redistribute resources based essentially on demography, on brute demographic might. Those states, and this is again an insight that he has documented and statistically supported, these states made improvements to health to find that the reward for that is to have less money for health, to spend on health, that their improvements in education meant they'd have less money to spend on education. Now, the reason is, of course, that previous finance commissions had based themselves on population figures from the 71 census, and that may seem odd to many outsiders, since we've had 4 censuses since 1971, and new numbers have been available to successive finance commissions. But the reason for this was indeed very simple, and it was made explicit in relation to an even more vital issue, that of political representation in our parliament. In 1976, the Omnibus 42nd Amendment to the Constitution decided to freeze the allocation of Lok Sabha seats to our states for 25 years to encourage population control by assuring states that their success in limiting their populations would not lose them Lok Sabha seats. In 2001, the NDA government of Prime Minister Vajpayee extended this arrangement for another 25 years. Its proposal, which became the 91st Amendment, was unanimously adopted by all parties in both houses of Parliament. Now, the thinking behind both Indira Gandhi's and Vajpayee's policies here was very clear. It was based on the sound principle that the reward for responsible stewardship by a state of demography and human development could not be political disenfranchisement. While there is some logic to the argument that in a democracy you must value all your citizens equally, whether they live in a progressive state or in one that by failing to empower its women and reducing total fertility has allowed its population to shoot through the roof. But at the same time, no federal democracy can survive the perception that states would lose their political clout if they develop well, while others would gain more seats into parliament as a reward for their failure. Now, this is the carefully balanced arrangement that the Modi government carelessly caused to be undone by instructing the Finance Commission to use the 2011 census figures instead of the 1971 figures. The 16th Finance Commission will be worse. And if the next census takes place soon after the 2024 elections, as the Home Minister has indicated, it will be worse still for the South, since population disparities have only worsened since 2011. We would have found that out had it not been for COVID, and they suspended the census then. But now, the irony, not only is this certain to be worse, I know for a fact, for example, that every demographer I've spoken to tells me that Kerala will lose population between 2011 and 2021, and by 26 or 27, whenever the next census is, it'll be even worse. The irony is that historically the South has been in any case subsidizing the North, even before all of these new adjustments by the Modi government. For example, for every 1 rupee of tax contributed by Uttar Pradesh, that state receives 1 rupee 79 paise, whereas for every 1 rupee of tax contributed by Karnataka, the state receives just 47 paise. All southern states recognize the need to correct regional imbalances and for richer states to subsidize poorer ones. I don't think anyone is arguing against that principle. But it is fair to ask, as Chief Minister Siddaramaiah once did during his previous tenure as Chief Minister, where is the reward for development? It's an actual quote from him last time. He added that if population was an important criterion for the apportionment of central taxes, for how long can we keep incentivizing population growth? Now, the iniquities are actually measurable. To take just one example, Karnataka meets 72% of its expenses from the state's own taxes. Bihar just has to cover 23%. They get 77% of their state budget from central taxes. In other words, unlike most federal systems, India's revenues are going disproportionately to its worst performing states, those with poor levels of education, high rates of fertility and population growth, while the high performance states in the South, and Vasu already indicated that in his welcoming speech, get short shrift. Now, these are important questions that the rest of India can ill afford to ignore. The states of the so-called cowbelt, the Hindi-speaking heartland, once called the Bimaru states, have comprehensively failed to improve their development indicators, notably relating to female literacy and women's empowerment. As a result, their population growth has outstripped that of the southern states, and in the current dispensation, that imbalanced population growth in poorly performing northern states makes them eligible for a larger share of tax revenues. Now, we all know the Constitution says in Article 1 that we are a union of states. As a result, we have created an interesting hybrid that many have dubbed quasi-federal. There is in the Constitution a distribution of powers between the union and the states, a union list, a state list. There are 47 items on the concurrent list in which both union and states can make laws. That the balance has been tilting towards the union in recent years is beyond dispute. The increasing resort to levying cess on a large number of items, which, unlike tax, does not need to be shared with the states, is merely the most striking illustration of this. Now, this conference in many ways marks the rise of a new Southern consciousness, or maybe South First itself is a symbol of that. A consciousness that the workings of our federal system are increasingly skewed in ways that have been exacerbated by the policies and attitudes of the current BJP-led union government. I believe that the country should pay attention to the great dangers arising from these issues, as well as the even greater dangers that will arise from the North's enhanced political clout in Parliament after the 91st Amendment lapses. As you know, that will end the freeze on the basis of the 71 census, and then from 2026, there will be a new delimitation. Either they can keep the existing numbers roughly adjusted around, say, 550, and increase the number of constituencies in the north and reduce the number of constituencies in the south, or as a gesture, they can leave the number of constituencies in the south the same and simply dramatically increase the number of constituencies in the north to create a larger parliament. And if even the women's reservation bill, as you know, is only supposed to be implemented after that delimitation is done, and if the intention is, as many suspect, to fill the rather cavernous hall of the new Lok Sabha building, the new building has got this vast space designed to accommodate as many as 880 MPs, then even if they're going to try and raise the total to somewhere close to 800, then certainly by any calculation, UP alone will have more MPs than all of South India put together, all the 5 South Indian states put together. Now, where does that leave our federalism if, for instance, the Hindi-speaking states can alone muster a 2/3 majority to amend the constitution? What would prevent them, for instance, from passing a law deciding that Hindi will be the Rashtra Bhasha, the national language, which every year some BJP MP stands up and proposes? Now, the tyranny of population numbers is actually going to make things worse for a while yet. If you take demographic patterns, for example, while northern states like Bihar, Jharkhand, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, and Uttar Pradesh had a decadal population growth rate of over 20% between 2001 and 2011. That is, imagine they grew by over 20% in those 10 years, so over 2% on average. Southern states like undivided Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, Kerala, Karnataka, and Tamil Nadu grew at less than 16% in exactly that same period. Kerala already had the country's lowest growth rate, which was 4.9% over the entire decade. That is 0.49% on average a year. And as I said, it's estimated to drop to negative growth of the next census. And that is just one-fifth of Bihar's growth rate. If you look at the bigger picture, Kerala's population grew about 56% between 1971 and 2011. So in half a century, it just grew 56%. Tamil Nadu grew 75%, but Rajasthan grew by 166%. Bihar by 146%. Even gigantic UP grew by 132%. Now, there are reassuring claims that all these numbers are gradually in the process of converging as family sizes are going down everywhere. But the fact is, for now, the divergences seem set to continue because Tamil Nadu's fertility rate is 1.6 and Kerala's is 1.7, whereas UP's is 3 and Bihar's is 3.2, the fertility rate being the number of children per woman. Now, this raises the question, why should Kerala be punished for its impressive performance by receiving less revenue from the Finance Commission and also losing seats in Parliament, thereby being forced to dilute its voice in national affairs? Why should Tamil Nadu's reward for extraordinary economic success, I think no one will dispute what an extraordinary success Tamil Nadu has had, as well as sustained growth and population control, why should their reward be lower tax revenues from the centre? Now, the government's answer would be, though they've not really engaged in this debate seriously yet, their answer would be that those are the rules of democracy. One person, one vote, one value means that the more people you have, the more political clout and tax rupees you get. But in a country like India, whose diversity is held together by a sense of common belonging, but whose civic nationalism must accommodate a range of states with divergent levels of development, it is essential that all feel that their common nationhood is a winning proposition for them. In a country where regional, religious, and linguistic tensions are never far from the surface, such an answer, that we have more people, so we'll have more money and more power, that risks rupturing the fragile bonds that hold us all together. Diversity does not appeal to a government which is now embarked on a quixotic exercise of one nation, one election, and one might as well add one party, one leader. You cannot mend a broken mirror. The mirror first cracked back in 1967 when the elections of 1967 threw up those SVD governments, Samyukta Vidhayak Dal governments, many of which fell within 6 months, 9 months, a year and a half, and so on. And that cracked mirror has now been shattered into multiple pieces, so many pieces that we have elections in one part of the country or the other every 6 months, more or less. But given what has happened to our other democratic institutions, that is no bad thing, since elections are now the only real opportunity for the public to demand accountability from their rulers. The Prime Minister talks about the expense of repeated elections, but studies show that the difference is negligible. Praveen Chakravarti and I wrote an article in the Hindu. I think it's about 5,000 rupees per voter, according to a Niti Aayog study. Prime Minister also says that governance is put on hold during multiple campaigns, but it doesn't need to be. It's his own fault that the Prime Minister and the Home Minister and half the cabinet are busy campaigning in every state election, every municipal election. They don't have to. It was certainly not the practice in the past. There has to be a basic respect for the obligations of prime ministerial office, that you have a country to run rather than a party to lead, a country to run rather than an election to win. So that is a peculiarly specific problem linked to the present Prime Minister and his party. In any case, it would be a logistical nightmare to do all this. I mean, I don't know if people realize. We have 543 parliamentary constituencies. We have 4,033 state assembly constituencies. We have 87,942 local body seats. And we have 31,46,163 village panchayat seats. And you want to elect all of them simultaneously at the same time? It absolutely is going to be absurd. And given the fact that each of these have their own constitutional authorities, their own constitutional rights, their own constitutional limitations, it is actually quite bizarre to try and sort of press them into the fantasy of an illusory uniformity. As it is, the Hindi, Hindutva, Hindustan politics of today's BJP is very different from the conciliatory coalition building of the Vajpayee era when the BJP was last in power. The present establishment's blatant majoritarian triumphalism, the brazenness of the Hindi supremacism that infuses their discourse, their unabashed expression of communal bigotry, and the culture of Aryavrat domination that infects their attitudes has already raised serious disquiet among many southern politicians. So far only in private conversations, but it's there. Allied to this is an insensitive and inept management of crucial federal issues, such as the botched allocation to states of funds from the State Disaster Risk Management Fund, SDRMF, for relief measures during the coronavirus lockdown. I think, Neelakantan, you've written about this in some detail. I would urge you to Google his article. He's given facts and figures. If the Modi government compounds its economic fecklessness with political recklessness, it could plunge India into turmoil. We have already seen how much the South is aggrieved by the ruling party's aggressive promotion of linguistic nationalism and the increasing calls for the adoption of Hindi as a national language. The three-language formula is breached every time by Hindi-speaking states that are complacently soaking up the benefits of their mother tongue's increasing dominance while disregarding their obligation to teach and learn a southern language in their own states. Meanwhile, southern civil servants are suffering the burden of the government's increasing resort to linguistic homogenization, Hindi file notations, while English is daily disparaged with scant regard for the utility of India, utility to India of its officialdom mastering a world language. I truly worry. I mean, when I try and explain to Hindiwalas, they talk about how extraordinary it is that we can use a language that speaks to our soul, that reflects the emotions of our people. And I say, yes, but the language that Singh or Sharma has heard in his mother's lap is not the language that Subramaniam and Reddy have heard in their mother's laps. And don't expect it to be reflective of their emotions and their souls. But it's also that the financial and political consequences of this attitude threatens the very unity of India, since the South would face political disenfranchisement to go along with its sense of financial victimization, a combination that is bound to generate resentments that can spill over beyond the confines of quotidian politics. Such concerns should ignite deep disquiet amongst all well-wishers of Indian democracy and all inclusive-minded Indian nationalists. The only remedy is to acknowledge that we need a more decentralized democracy, one in which the central share of tax resources is not so crucial, and the political authority of New Delhi is not so overwhelming. That could make the concerns raised at the Dakshin dialogues last year, and no doubt to be raised this year, less troubling. But as long as our system is what it is, we need to run it sensitively. That is something that the Modi government has so far failed to do. If the government is genuinely conscious of these concerns, it should convene a serious discussion, perhaps through the Niti Aayog or the Interstate Council with the southern states, to discuss their concerns and apprehensions and explore formulae for resolving them before matters escalate into a crisis. The South is both literally and metaphorically invested in the North and in the collective idea of India of which we are all proud. We are as passionate about India as anyone in the North is. But that India, in keeping with the vision of giants like Gandhiji, Tagore, Nehru, should be pluralist, equitable, and inclusive. Allowing such divisive trends to fester into problems is not in anyone's interests, above all, not in the Indian national interest. The program for the day promises to delve into all of these issues, and all I can say is that I wish you great success in your deliberations. Thank you very much, and Jai Hind.